We're live. Welcome, welcome. This is Cut to the Chase. Ife should be here shortly. My name is Sylvester Rivers. You're on listening to KPFK Los Angeles 90.7 FM on your FM dial and streaming live throughout the universe. Not just the world, the universe at kpfk.org. Also 98.7 FM in Santa Barbara, 93.7 FM in San Diego County, and 99.5 FM in Ridgecrest and China Lake. Of course, what we do here, this is, as I said, Cut to the Chase. What are we? We are Weekly Public Affairs radio show, broadcast every Friday morning at 8 a.m. Pacific time. We're solution-oriented by asking some questions like, what do we want? What do we need? And how do we get it? Today, we have a very special guest who I met up at what was it called? Lightning in a Bottle. And the brother was talking about mushrooms because my friend did one last year and they said, you got to listen to this, brother. So he gave an excellent speech, but I forgot to tell you his name is Darren LeBaron. I forgot to tell you, Darren, we have to go to the news headlines for about 5 minutes. Then we're going to come back to you. We'll do that in a second. But Darren is talking about mushrooms, and it was so ironic because I had just finished auditioning for a friend's book, children's book. So I was doing the narration, and guess what it was about? Mushrooms. So it's quite interesting. Darren, we're going to be right back with you. Let's go to Democracy Now! News headlines, and we'll be right back with Darren LeBaron. Ooh, that's news headlines with Democracy Now! And that was Amy Goodman. The news doesn't tell you what to think, it tells you what to think about. For instance, there was a submarine that was just 24/7 news. But how about the migrant shipwreck near Greece? It was a horrible tragedy and very, a little bit on it, but not a lot. And not at the passion for the submarine. What is that? Is that the media? Hundreds were missing, presumed that drowned after the shipwreck, but the submarine was breaking news. So, that's the media. The media is what KPFK is. We are a public radio station. We get our money from you. So before we get into our guest, we're going to just ask you to donate to KPFK. Good morning, Darren.
Good morning, sir. How you doing?
I'm great, man. How are you doing? It's a busy man. We're going to talk to you. I just want to tell our listeners that this station is a nonprofit station, and we're in our fund drive. So we want them to call in and subscribe. For only, the minimum is $25 a year. Yeah, I said a year, not a month, a year. You can do $5 a month as a sustainer, and you can get premiums. I think for $75, we're offering past archived shows of Cut to the Chase, where we have, oh my God, some very interesting and educational information, which we were going to have today also. 818-985-5735. Call in because, probably if you're a subscriber at the end of the show, we might have time to open up the phones and talk to Darren about his subject, which is mushrooms. So you could ask him questions, but only those people who subscribe or are going to subscribe can talk to Darren, because I'm sure you have questions for him. 818-985-5735. Darren, man, I was up there. My friend said, we got to go see this brother. He's talking about mushrooms. Oh, mushrooms, so what? But I was so intrigued by when you started, you dealt with the historical factor of it. You went through the Kemetic and ancient roots of this, what would you call it? Mushroom, a fungus?
Yeah, you got it, man. Yeah, mushrooms, fungus. People got different names for this living and breathing organism. But yeah, man, I believe at Light in the Bottle, where we connected, I was presenting on, I think the theme was titled, it was either You're a Mushroom Having the Human Experience, and then I had the African origins of psychedelics. So I came from two particular trajectories, let's say. And one was looking at the historical, spiritual, indigenous use approaches to working with magic mushrooms, as some people refer to it. And then there was also just looking at this organism, just as far as it being, the soil creator, and any and everything that's ever come out of the soil, it being, an extension of this fungus network that we know as mycelium. So I can't remember exactly which ones you was at, bro, but you tell me, and what did
You
you get
know,
from it?
we're gonna go through all of them. We're joined, by the way, by Ife. Good morning, Ife. That's my co-host there,
Peace.
Ife Jai. And you know what I want to.
Good morning. Good morning. Listen, I was on them things, man, last night. This is perfect segue to come in on this conversation. No, I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing. I'm just teasing. I was so excited to be able to come on today, though, because I'm so fascinated about what this guy has to say. So let me jump in and listen.
Well, first I want to talk. Tell us about the African origins of mushroom. What do you mean the African origins? African historical use. Go ahead.
Okay, well, like for me, it starts off with like personally being interested in African history. Being somebody who's first generation conceived, born and bred in the UK from my family lineage, always wanting to know, my heritage, where I come from, and obviously there being gaps based on history as far as how African people ended up in the Caribbean and then into Europe. So I've just always been interested in, in my story. And as I developed and got more interested in spiritual practices, it was more like, okay, I'm getting more about the history. Let me learn about the spiritual practices. What were we doing on the African continent, in the Caribbeans, islands and these various indigenous places before, the introduction of Christianity and other religions. And that in itself was the beginning of me finding out that there were certain practices, certain customs, that related to, rituals, ceremonies that involve plants and things like that, and brews and concoctions, but not really being privy to what all of that was and is at the time. And as I further did, moved into my interest in learning about, well, what was we doing and how did they do it? I slowly but surely came to the understanding that, hallucinogenic, psychedelic, entheogenic, these types of plants that, as they're referred to, play a big part in African traditional cultures, as well as indigenous cultures all around the world. But being somebody of African heritage, it was something that I wanted to find out more about. I then had to give a big shout out to the OG teacher of mine, Baba Kalindi Ii, who was from Detroit and was sharing this type of information for over 30 plus years, in the community. My own research coming into connection with his research and the work that he was doing inspired me to, kind of look deeper into the subject matter. And I guess, when you look at, some of the famous African societies like, the Egyptians or better yet the Kemetians, the Zulus, so-called pygmy tribes of Africa, they've all got these connections and relationships and mythologies and oral traditions and customs that relate to what we would call psychedelic plants. So that's what I share and I have an interest in. So I share that along with other, bits of information that relate to psychedelics and indigenous groups wherever they are on the planet.
Just a point. I remember when I was young, my dad, he was from the South. Then we moved to Ohio, but we still lived in the country. And he used to go in the forest, in the woods behind the house, and get these plants, these concoctions, and put them in a bottle and soak them. I'd never paid any attention. He never taught me about it, but I do remember that where he went in and this was medicine, he said. But specifically, what did you find the connection to? You talking about your search for African identity and where we came and the spirituality of the plants. Did you find any specific pictures or reference to the mushrooms?
Yeah, okay. So let's just start where I started, So I went to like Roman Catholic schools in the UK, man, in primary and secondary school, what you call elementary and high school. And I always wanted to know the origins and the source of Adam and Eve. I was educated about Adam and Eve being, the mother and father of humans. And I was always curious to know, like, well, if we done our family tree, could we trace our way back to the origins of the first people, Adam and Eve? Like, where did they come from? And, at the time in school, I wasn't able to unpack all of that and it wasn't shared with me in school. But, getting into early adulthood, I was able to kind of start doing my own research. And I came across some of the earliest or the first tribes that we know of in this current cycle of Earth that you can find primarily in Central Africa and the southern parts of Africa. They are referred to them as so-called pygmy tribes because they're not actually referred to themselves as pygmies. It's what, people who came from outside of those regions refer to them as. But these groups were known in Central Africa as the Twa, the Aka, the Baka, the Buti, and the Babongo, just to name a handful. And in the southern regions of Africa, what we call South Africa, you would have what are known commonly called the Bushmen, or the Khoisan, or the Khoikhoi, or the San tribe. So there are different names, but these are the earliest groups that we know, earliest tribes, earliest peoples that we know on planet Earth that basically populated Earth as we know it today. So I identified Adam and Eve, let's say, for lack of a better, names. And I wanted to know, do they have any relationship to or make reference to psychedelics? So I'll give you two references. So one, when they talk about their creation, one of the creation stories from one of these groups in the Congo region, they talk about life in general on Earth being started by mushrooms. I know it might sound far-fetched, but they're like, creation was birthed out of this separation of a mushroom. And from this phenomenon that took place, stars, rivers, mountains, humans, and everything came out of this mushroom experience. And I know it's mythology, and to some people it's just, like stories, but these stories have meaning, they have purpose. And in fact, they're actually science. They're breaking down science. And without going into too much detail on, it's like a phenomenon in science that they call panspermia, which suggests that life on planet Earth started from this alien phenomenon, extraterrestrial phenomenon, which basically means something that kickstarted life on Earth that wasn't from Earth. So this means that the mushrooms, or the spores, which are like the seeds of mushrooms that seeded planet Earth, basically came from beyond the Earth and arrived to Earth on asteroids and comets and stuff like that. And that's what seeded and kickstarted life on planet Earth. And what we have today is these spores then breaking down the bedrock, creating soil. 500 million years later, we get plants, and then a million years later, we get humans evolving out of this phenomenon. And it's basically just a mythology that science is now complementing. And where am I going with this? Millions of years later, what we have is the evolvement or the evolution of what we would call psilocybin mushrooms, magic mushrooms. And this is all part and parcel of this Adam and Eve mythology that I kind of was tapping into, where they talk about, them partaking in this fruit would give them knowledge and wisdom that would be godlike, or, what the gods have. This is what the biblical references are. But they also talk about this in Africa. This is the point I'm making. This is what these small people, these small tribes talk about. So between their own mythology, religion, and science, there's this kind of connection between mushrooms being kickstarting life on Earth as we know it, but also playing a big role in developing our consciousness, our spiritual systems. And you find this from the earliest groups in Africa. These are these so-called pygmy groups. And then it migrates all the way up the Nile River. And it's what we call the Nile Valley civilizations. And the peak of that being, ancient Egypt, or better yet, Kemet. And they have conversations, initiations, mythologies, images, symbols that bring the mushroom into this conversation. I don't know. You need to, we could get specific as far as what symbols. It's like there's an endless list. I wouldn't know where to start, but I'll try to start at the beginning to give you some reference, and then you can look at some of their ceremonies and customs, and you see that's kind of like just woven into their lifestyle.
That's so interesting, because that is really interesting, because we had a brother named Asher Quasey on. He talks about Christianity and all this symbolism that you mentioned, the symbolism and whatnot. But when you said something that was really interesting, you talked about the apple, which is eating something and giving people this knowledge. So, this one book by a brother named John Jackson, Christianity Before Christ, he talks about all the civilizations who had this mythology, and it was all similar to it was mythology, but it was all similar to immaculate birth. A lot of civilizations had different immaculate birth stories. And now what you're saying is okay, but it points to this particular mushroom, the apple. Maybe they changed that, instead of the apple, it was a mushroom.
That's right, bro. And I'm not sitting there saying, because basically mythology is just that. There's layers, man. It's like an image. It's like a picture. A picture paints 1,000 words. And mythology has layers and it has depths to it. So you can interpret it in many different ways, and then you can line up facts that complement the mythology. But when we're talking about the fruit, that's what we're talking about. This fruit, mushrooms being a fruit, because that's what they actually are. They're the fruiting body of this fungus network. And in the biblical reference, when they talk about mushrooms, let's say, or these particular technologies, as I like to also refer to them, that were gifted to the prophets and God's chosen people, you either get this.
Wait, let's back up. You say in the biblical references, say that again. They talk because that was one of my questions. Go ahead, keep going.
Yeah, they make reference to fruit, gifts, and bread in particular. So I'm giving you keywords. When you see these in the Bible, like gifts, when they make reference to gifts, that might be like Jesus' story and him being gifted things, or the gift, and or fruit, and or bread. For example, say the bread. Let's stick with the bread. All right. So with the bread, for example, say we talk about the bread, the breaking of bread, Jesus breaking bread amongst his disciples. And this is the notion where we get the Last Supper, and then we get Holy Communion in church. And in Holy Communion, they break the bread and divide bread and distribute wine. You should have what we would call Holy Communion. Holy Communion is to communicate with the holy. So you have this ceremony, this ritual where you would eat bread and wine and communicate with the holy. I don't know how many people in the audience are listening, have done that ceremony before, Holy Communion, the Eucharist. So with that said, if you go back to ancient Kemet, it was known as the open of the mouth ceremony. And if you go to other traditions and other cultures, they have very similar ceremonies or customs where they would communicate with their holy, with their divine, with their source, with their God, with their deities, with their ancestors. And this bread, in particular, the biblical reference, this manna or this food that came from heaven, that God gave, allows you to communicate with God. So it goes back to this apple reference, bread reference. And when you go to Kemet or ancient Egypt, they make reference to this bread or the food of the gods and these ceremonies that involve various psychoactives, which combine magic mushrooms, psilocybin mushrooms. They also make reference to acacia, which is the tree of knowledge or the holy tree or the tree of life in ancient Kemet. And acacia is a DMT containing plant or bush, which means DMT means dimethyltryptamine, which is also a psychoactive. So I'm just saying there's loads of references, biblical references, but when you unpack them like using a biblical encyclopedia, for example, it will tell you the bread is a reference from food from heaven, manna or menu, as it's referred to in Kemet, and menu as well as it's referred to in Islam. And the Prophet Muhammad makes reference to menu and it being food for the eye. So there's all these codes and mythologies even within the religion that kind of it's up to some people's interpretation, where you could say, it's psychedelics, or it's an apple, or some people say it makes reference to other other phenomena. But I'm just out here representing for the understanding that through Holy Communion and you communicating with the holy or the divine is definitely something that is activated through psychedelics and not necessarily bread. Like naan bread or bitter bread.
So when you cut to the chase, it's mushroom.
Yeah.
Basically. So the Dogon people, to this day, it's not known how they were able to track the star Sirius without any telescopes. Have you researched about them? Do you know about them? Or were they connected?
I'm definitely familiar with the Dogon. And I'm not going to sit here because I'm not a Dogon initiate, and I'm not going to sit here, to share their mystery systems. But I'm just saying that to say that all traditional African cultures have a mystery system. And you're going to find out that, the secret about a lot of these mystery systems is contained in their concoctions, man. So I'm not going to sit here and speak on the Dogon, but I can speak on other tribes, other groups that have similar phenomenons. Like, how do they get this knowledge and information? Where, how do they get access to this stuff? Now, for those of us who have delved into these mushroom realms and acacia realms and boba realms, you understand that it places you in the realms of the ancestors, which most of these cultures and societies are geared around. Their fundamental foundations are dealing with ancestor worship, as some people refer to it, communicating with their ancestors. Well, how do they communicate with their ancestors? Whether they're Dogon, Zulu, Kemetian, they have certain rituals and customs that involve getting into altered states of consciousness. And that could be through dance, through music, and there's these concoctions and brews that they drink. It's a complementary process. I don't want to just sit here and say it's all psychedelics, but it's definitely psychedelics have inspired these traditions and customs. And when you bring all of that together between the drums, the dance, fire, mushrooms, or these brews, this is where they're getting access to these realms, where they're getting a type of knowledge and information, where they could say, yo, man, we can map out the star systems, we can map out the planets. And yeah, they don't have spaceships, crafts, physical ones, but they're utilizing energetic crafts and energetic UFOs, let's say, which is all to do with their mystery systems of their spiritual practices.
Wow.
I love it. You know what? Can I ask a question? When can I ask a question? I got so many questions, Sly.
You can. Let's take a quick break, and then we're going to go on to it, because, you know, in my promo I said, can mushrooms heal the hood? That was one of your speeches online. I want to get to that, but we'll be right back. This is KPFK Los Angeles. We encourage you to call in and subscribe to this conversation, to this station, to all the programs that you hear that you won't hear anywhere else. You didn't hear any station talking, this brother on talking about mushrooms, only on KPFK. 818-985-5735.
You are listening to Cut to the Chase. The subject is mushrooms, programming you don't hear anywhere else. We're here, we're talking about it. You heard about mushrooms, right? Deep thoughts and finding yourself on mushrooms. You heard the stories. Alan Watts talked about it. Roy of Hollywood talked about the power of the shrooms. Indigenous folks, they can't be wrong, right? They all can't be wrong. So, folks, call now and pledge for programming you don't hear anywhere else. 818-985-5735. 818-985-KPFK. It's all about health and healing. Maybe not for everyone, but definitely an educational class with Darren LeBaron, our guest here on Cut to the Chase. 818-985-5735. If we can get 20 of you to pledge at $20, we can reach our goal.
Keep going. You're doing great.
Well, just letting folks know that, you know, they need to call and support programming like this.
You want to get like $1,000 this hour. You really do. And that's not difficult.
Right. So, folks, maybe some of you, our friends out there, can pledge and make a challenge for the rest of the listeners out there. Can somebody pledge $1,000, and can we get some folks out there to meet that pledge, to meet that challenge? 818-985-5735, 818-985-KPFK. If you've learned anything from this program in the past few months, up to a year, call now and let us know. We really want to hear from you. 818-985-5735.
And we're just getting warmed up. And Darren, you know, we're going to open up the phones if we get calls. If we get calls to subscribe, we'll open it up to ask him questions at 818-985-5735. Eight 818-985-5735. This is KPFK Los Angeles. My name is Sylvester Rivers. We got Ife Jai on there. We got LeBaron. And we're rolling.
Yeah. Can I get a question in? Because I'm so curious. Don't get it twisted. You know, I'm not in the studio today, but you know, I'm itching.
I wouldn't have known unless you told me.
I know. You know, it's so fun. I was so excited to have our guest on the show today because, you know, I personally don't smoke weed. You know, I don't smoke weed. And so I digest a lot of things, though. I eat a lot of things. I just don't burn anything to put anything in my mouth that's burned. So anyway, I'm so curious about, you said that there's a moment where you would commune and there's a level of consciousness that of degree of consciousness that shifts with hallucinogenics or with mushrooms. So can you talk about some of because I've heard of other entertainers like Will Smith talk about ayahuasca and how it made him face his fears. And once he faced his fears, it really let him grow as a human being and just grow, like, you know, in terms of his mental fortification. So is that real, or is that something that I guess everybody might pump up more so than not? Like, do your mind, does your body, does your mental really do shift for the better once you have these kind of journeys or you take these kind of plant medicines?
I think what's really important is, one, your awareness of it. I say that to say that it's all basically get around your intentions. People partake in these substances for different reasons, you know. For the most part, you know, there's a whole kind of recreational, you know, approach to utilizing psychedelics, where there's people who go partying, raving, you know, festivals and stuff like that, and partaking in psychedelics, and they're not necessarily tapping in to psychedelics for the spiritual, for the awakenedness, you know, aspect of it. It's really just a kind of supporting, lightening your load, because that's what it does at different dosages. It imparts different things. So, you know, at very low doses, it could be something that just helps you like relax and loosens you up. You know, that's a big part of it, which, you know, is part of, you know, lightening your load, which I ultimately say is like a big part that it plays in most people's experiences, you know, with the whole microdosing thing, which is really popular now. You know, like if you're stressed out, if you're anxious, if you're dealing with depression, it can be really supportive for those kind of, for those healing modalities that are required. But it's also complementary to your intentions and your lifestyle choices, you know. So, and then at what we would call higher dose experiences, or in the right set and setting, the environment that you create and the mindset that you're in and the intentions that you have, you can take an appropriate amount of mushrooms to then have what we would call more spiritual or enlightening, you know, experiences. Again, it's like you as the person partaking this would then need to determine why you're doing it. You're going to be asking those questions, why are you doing it? And what you get out of it kind of would be as much as what you put into it, and then you invest into learning and finding out. So that's why I bring in those kind of cultural and spiritual elements to give people some foundations in this space as far as understanding what it's all about. But for sure, once you do cross over, you're finding out that I would probably say, you know, 10 out of 10 people that are taking this stuff and say, yo, it was like a life-changing experience, if not profound or spiritual experience that one has had, you know. So, and I would co-sign that, you know. But again, it would all depend on how much you're taking and, you know, why you're doing this. But I could speak for myself and, you know, others that I know on this journey and path, and would definitely say that it's a life-changing experience, definitely a healing experience, spiritual experience, a shift in consciousness. You know, it's enlightening, it's liberating. It brings all of those things that you may have heard Will Smith or some of the other popular celebrities talking about it. I would say that there is a trend, and, you know, and there's a gaslighting and things like that, where people promote, put things out there without, you know, having like the balance. And I would say the balance is that it can be challenging. And in general, the work that is required for you to, you know, move through some of these enlightening experiences may require you to do work. You know, what some people refer to as shadow work. You know, the work that you kind of avoid doing, the things about yourself that need confronting and dealing with and addressing, that you've been pushing away for, you know, it could be a whole lifetime or weeks, months, or years, but it brings it up to the forefront. It reveals certain things to you about yourself that you may not want to handle at that time, you know. And it's like, yo, for you to move on, for you to grow, for you to progress in your life, you're going to need to address these things. And these are some of the challenges that some people have in their experiences. So there's a balance to you reach this, you know, spiritual enlightenment and awakening. It's like you got to check yourself, basically, man. It requires you to check yourself.
I love that. You said you can go on a spiritual journey, but it might take some work while you're there to process through that. And I don't know if people think about that part when they're experimenting with these moments, because I know the ayahuasca thing has been another, like you said, kind of trending topic. You know, people are starting to get into these epiphany-like journeys, and they want to have these experiences, but it does require some emotional, some spiritual grounding to be able to get through that. I love that.
For sure, for sure.
And what you said about the rituals, of course, when the Christians, they have with the commune, and they have the wine and they drink, although they don't use it for any spiritual thing, but it's still, you know, a substance that can alter your imagination, I guess you would say. But you're saying the
Which
mushroom.
my church did have wine. It was more so like grape juice in my church.
Back in the day they did, but you had on your website Can mushrooms heal the hood?
Sure.
Yeah, that was a very interesting question. I used that at the start of my promo. Talk about that. How can mushrooms heal the hood?
Oh, most definitely, man. And again, it comes from different perspectives when I share this subject. So just going back to, perfect example being, so one, I make it clear that when I talk about the hood, one, I'm talking about your hood. Firstly, your own mind. That's the first hood that you need to start healing and working with. And then once you've worked with that, work with your family, and then your neighborhood and the community, it spreads out from there. But just as far as working with yourself, mushrooms and some of these other, psychedelic plants, as they're referred to, have healing potential. A lot of the research now in this so-called psychedelic renaissance that we're in, all the research is geared around like the mental health challenges that we're currently faced in these parts of the world that we have, and how psychedelics are, like kind of leading the way and pioneering some of the latest research around how we can address some of our mental health issues, like depression, anxiety, PTSD, and these are like really common mental health challenges that people face all around the world. And what's happening now with the trials with MDMA, psilocybin in particular, and ketamine even, it's suggesting that, in some cases, one, but 2 to 3 sittings with the right support can support people in moving away from their mental health challenges that they may have. I'll give you a perfect example. In the States, we've done the trials with soldiers in the military who faced PTSD. They'd gone to war, they'd been out and experienced experiences, of seeing people being killed and murdering people themselves, a range of different experiences. Then they're coming back to civilian lifestyles and having PTSD, extreme PTSD. And cut a long story short, they've been doing trials with MDMA and psilocybin. And when they've done their MDMA trials, what they found out is that 100% of soldiers benefited from their psychedelic experience.
Wow.
67% totally eliminated their PTSD. And the remaining 30 or whatever percent was left, it significantly reduced their PTSD. And it was no longer dependent upon the medication that they was being utilizing at that time. So, and there's many other trials that are out there. They're working with cancer patients who have got anxiety and, a range of, therapeutic approaches. And they've seen that, psychedelics are working with these trials. So why am I saying that? Because the soldiers that they make reference to and the work that I do, I work with young soldiers in the street. I'm not talking about from the military. I'm just talking about I work with hard to reach communities. I work with young people who've been just come out of prison, been kicked out of school. They refer to them as hard to reach, but they're basically people who live in the hood, who live in, communities that are low income, poor education, poor health, and primarily that affects people of color all around the world, including where I'm at in the UK. So, because I'm privy to this research and I'm privy to some of the challenges that we face in our community, I was like, not to say that we need to do the trials in the hood, but we should be looking at, could we be utilizing these technologies in the same way? Could we have bespoke approaches to addressing some of our mental health issues and challenges? And then I'll give an example of one of the only trials that have been done with, it was actually done in the United States in a few years back, where they done trials with African Americans with race-based trauma who was affected with PTSD, and they were working with MDMA to see if they could get any progress with the challenges that African Americans have faced in the Americas. And the lady who was pioneering the trials was Monica T. Williams. And what came out of the trials was, one, it was really difficult to engage African Americans in general in these trials. One, because of our relationship with the medical system in general is one where we don't have a great relationship. And two, psychedelics is still a taboo in our community. So, to be saying to come on these trials and take psychedelics, like, what the hell are you talking about? But with for the people she was able to get involved and engage in the trials, they were able to get results. And and similar to the soldiers on the from the military, they're able to work with everyday African American people who weren't in the military but have these similar challenges based on what they experienced in the Americas, directly and indirectly through epigenetics, where you can inherit trauma by way of the genes that are passed on to you. I've been exploring all of this, and I think that to say that the trials with the soldiers, the trials with the African Americans that signed up for it, suggests to me personally, with my own experiences that I've had, that there's some potential that we could heal the hood. And there are some communities around the world that have, put this to the test, let's say, and are working with, people in indigenous cultures around the world in places where it's legal. There's not data and statistics that we can, push forward, because to do these trials, they need to be done under conditions like Monica T. Williams had set up in the States. But you can go on YouTube, for example's sake. I know that's not maybe the best reference base, but you can see some of the independent trials and studies that have been done that suggest, again, that this works with a range of different people from different backgrounds. We're talking about people who are addicted to opiate drugs, heroin and cocaine and stuff, that are coming off drugs. I don't know if drugs affect African Americans in the hood, in where you're at, but if it can help benefit people who have got money to spend a few $1,000s to go to Costa Rica and go to these places where it's benefiting them. I'm like, well, we have addicts in our community where I'm from, that are addicted to alcohol and, addicted to opiate drugs and so forth. And there's research out there that suggests that these things help with that. So I'm saying, hey, let's look at how these things could potentially heal the hood, because what we need to look at is maybe like bespoke approaches. The one size fits all approach may not be relevant to people from the community where I come from, because where I come from is basically the hood. So I'm looking at, where can we have these conversations? How can we start to build mature conversations around this and explore how we can heal ourselves and heal our community?
Wow.
I love that. I think there's some truth there to that. I don't think that that's that far off, because you mentioned already that there are some, if you administer the shrooms or whatever psychedelic, whatever it is that you're taking in a certain dose, that you can have these epiphany, like conscious level, conscious changing type experiences. And when you say heal the hood, I'm thinking about the post-traumatic slave syndrome type energy, the traumas that we've carried, the things that keep us in the way of our own growth. Maybe not so much this, esoteric healing the hood and money just falling out the sky, but literally like the trauma that many of us have suffered from. How do we really get past those things collectively? I think that there is some truth of being able to take something that helps you see outside yourself, or having those introspective kind of moments of looking in the mirror for real and being able to assess yourself for yourself. I think there's some power in that. And if we, like you mentioned, really look at the history of being able to look at ourselves in these kind of dimensions, I think that there is some truth to it. But people have to get over the stigma of what the media makes us think of when we think about shrooms and little people coming out of the ceilings and colors floating everywhere. Like, the media really gives us the impression of what it is, and we don't, know anything beyond that.
Yeah, trauma is a big part of the life here of African Americans in America, and the inability to know yourself. But Darren, let's talk about you. What was your experience? Why? What do you find for yourself? Does it why you take them? If you take them, you haven't said you did, and why do you take them? Go ahead.
With my experiences, although I may have had my own intentions of what I would like to have got out of it, what happened when I started to engage in these technologies, as I refer to them, they basically, I'll say, the fundamental thing that it allowed me to do was breathe. It allowed me to lighten my load. I realized that I was carrying around all this baggage that didn't serve me well. Some of it I created myself, some of it, I inherited, and some of it had been forced on me due to the environment that I was in. But I was able to kind of see these things now, and it was revealed to me in different ways. And it was clear to me that there was just certain things that I could drop, which freed me up, which allowed me to feel more comfortable in my skin. And for the most part, with the world that we live in, that just the physical side of how we look, as African people in the diaspora, we've been made to not feel comfortable in our own skin just based on our hue, or our skin color, and our hair texture and things like this. So just on a basis, not that I personally had those challenges, but that in itself is going to support you in feeling comfortable in your skin with whichever baggage you might be carrying around with you. So regardless of what places it could blast you off into and different dimensions and things like that, I realized and felt like, this definitely has therapeutic and healing potential. It was working on me, and I didn't even get into it before. I wanted to blast off the different universes and check out different galaxies and things like that. And, but at the same time, having these experiences, it was like, there's some internal work that I need to do that I was unaware of. And it's no different from like being an alcoholic For you to want to deal with it and go to an AA meeting, you've got to identify that you're an alcoholic, and then go say, hey, like, I want to do the healing work. But what I realized, for the most part, a lot of us walk around with this trauma and we don't even actually know what it is, because it's the norm. It's just growing up. It's just the way that we grow up. So the fact that it allowed me to start unpacking that and dealing with that and lightening my load, I knew immediately that it was beneficial to me, man. And I just felt like, yo, this could help my homies. It could help my family. It could even help my enemies, my foe, man. Like, they were just like, so much I was getting out of it. And, and then meeting other people who were coming from similar backgrounds to myself and were having similar experiences. This is where we got the notion that, yo, this stuff could really heal the hood, man, and, heal ourselves and heal our households and our friends and our families and our foes. So this is what, where that comes from. And in addition to not just the psychedelic mushrooms, as I said, I'm a food grower. I come from a cultivation background. When I'm talking about healing the hood with mushrooms, I'm also saying that we can actually, like, replenish the soil, meaning that would allow us to grow our own healthy food, which is really important. And growing food, which is a commodity that can be distributed all around the world, could help us create sustainable incomes for ourselves. There are certain mushrooms that are very valuable, and once they're processed in certain ways, can become medicine, can become food. There's gourmet mushrooms. There's like a whole plethora of approaches that we could take into, like, bringing this knowledge and information and educating the community as to how we can, sort our healing out. That's physical healing, physical health, building up our immune system, and our spiritual health too. So that's our spiritual immune system that, the psilocybin mushrooms work on. So that's where I'm coming from with the whole healing the hood with mushrooms. Is, as I said, there's many approaches to this.
Well, with the little time we have left, did you want to say something, Ife?
Oh, no. I was just saying how I love that. Yeah, this is just wonderful. Go ahead.
The little time we have left, you mentioned composting, growing our own food. What's the relationship between mushrooms? I'm not quite clear. How do mushrooms help in that process?
Well, just for the record, mushrooms are the soil creators. They created soil. They have an investment in soil. The form of the fungus, known as mycelium, is what's basically embedded in the soil, which allows plants to get their nutrients as well as communicate with each other. So any and everything that's in the soil is kind of the membrane, the motherboard, the central nervous system of it is fungus. It's this mycelium network, as it's referred to. And this is basically what breaks down organic matter. And organic matter is any and everything that's been alive. So when we're talking about composting, when you put things on a compost heap and it breaks down, and that's what we use to then feed the soil, again, it's this fungus, it's this mycelium that breaks down a banana peel or the apple core, turns it back into soil again, which then rejuvenates, gives food, gives life to the soil. So it's really important to understand that we come from the soil and we go back to the soil. And with that said, it plays an integral part in, all of the things that have ever come out of the soil. So as far as, again, like, it's healing potential, not just for human beings, but it's known as bioremediation. Like, humans have done a very destructive part in depleting the soil and things like that on planet Earth. And mushrooms can definitely support in helping with what we call bioremediation and bringing nutrients into the soil, re-greening desert areas, cleaning up polluted waters. We can actually create sustainable biofuels using mushrooms. We can make clothing from mushrooms. They're creating mushroom burial suits, mushroom coffins, mushroom bricks. It's like just an endless list of some of the unsustainable things that humans have been doing, where we can bring mushrooms into the conversation, and they can definitely support in that. One of the biggest issues that we've got on planet Earth right now is this plastic problem, for example, that humans have created. We've identified that there's about 50 species of mushrooms now that can eat plastic. They can actually eat plastic and turn it into good stuff. And then we can also replace the plastic packaging with mushroom material. So, like, I could be here all day and share, with us, like, the potential and the healing potential of mushrooms for planet Earth as well as human beings.
Well, I'd like to say there's a new superhero on coming out. His name is the Great Mycelium. The Great Mycelium is my friend's from Hawaii's children's book. And the lead character is this young guy named the Great Mycelium, coming to a bookstore near you soon. 818-985-5735 with a little time we have left. If you are a subscriber, if you want to subscribe and you want to ask Darren a question, you can call that number. You can call 818-985-5735. We are listener-sponsored radio station. You wouldn't hear this on ABC, CBS, CIA, oops, FBI, none of that. You won't hear that. Yeah, those are media outlets too. Trust me, they influence a lot of the media. So, 818-985-5735 to talk to if you want to talk to. If not, call and subscribe. We have our premium is past shows of Cut to the Chase. We're here. We volunteer because we want, there's three things we want to do. We want to know, what do we want? We want equity. We want peace. We want harmony. We want to enjoy our own spirituality. What do we need? We need access to healthcare. We need access to housing. And how do we get it? Well, Darren gave you one way. We need to, what did it say? Wosa. We need to
Lighten your load.
lighting your load. That's what he did. 818-985-5735 is our number. Darren, you're a busy man. You also talk, you have classes, talk about your business, your classes, the things that you do. Where are you going to be? Are you going to come to LA?
Man, I was in that part of the world when, my travels started this time round. So I do go back to the West Coast and just within a week, in fact. But I'm currently in Houston, Texas. I will be moving across to Detroit and eventually over to San Francisco, in fact. And I'm presenting the same title of that you mentioned, how mushrooms can heal the hood. And it's just about, educating people about the role that mushrooms have played, some of the things that I've shared here on today, and even more, just as far as, the role it plays in, supporting humanity and how it can help humanity moving forward. And it's just like tasters, just to give people, because like you said, there's not many people are privy to this stuff, especially in our communities. So we don't want to be mentioning mushrooms and people just think, oh, they're deadly, they're toxic.
Mhm.
Oh, it's just that mumbo jumbo stuff. It's like, no, man, it's like really fundamental to, to planet Earth. So just really educating people on that front. I'm an educator of mushroom cultivating, so teaching people how to grow these gourmet and medicinal mushrooms. You got mushrooms like lion's mane that are really good at building, regrowing nerves, you call it, and that's supporting with people who are challenged by things like Alzheimer's and dementia and things like that. So I'm just bringing some of the knowledge and information that I've had, that I've done research on, and bringing that into spaces and places where we're not necessarily in these conversations, and that's like in the hood. So it's like just bringing that.
Do you train people? I've had people say that when you take these kind of journeys that you need to have someone there, kind of like a doula or a facilitator to kind of help you through your journey. Do you teach people how to do that as well for like mushroom journeys and things like that?
No, that's not personally something that I do or teach or share. I can point you in the right direction. There are people out there that do that type of work. There's training out there and provisions out there all around the world, in fact. But I'm more like at the base level. I'm like, yo, because we, before we should even be talking to people like taking mushrooms, like most people don't even know what mushrooms are. So for me, that was really important. And, the space or the role that I play just as an educator, making people feel like they can at least have a mature conversation about this now.
Yeah.
And as I said, it doesn't start from like an ignorant or naive perspective. Like most of us were raised, I'm like, just say no. But when it comes to these things, but we should have don't put them all in one category, and that's what's happened. They just all been put into one, in one box, in one corner, and we kind of put mushrooms with crack cocaine, with heroin, and it's like that's actually not the case.
Totally different.
Yeah, it definitely is, and like that's where like okay, so let's just start unpacking what that looks like and why are mushrooms different from heroin and crack and these other recreational drugs and stuff like that. And so yeah, that's my watch.
The little time we have left, we have a couple of callers, but we only have a minute and a half or less. Asha is on the line. And he has, Asha, I hope you're a subscriber. Go ahead.
Welcome to Cut to the Chase.
Yes, just want to mention that I've been listening to KPFK since 1987, and the first thing that caught my attention when I started listening was the show, Roy Tuckman's show, Something's Happening, and in fact, who was first voice on that show when I happened to stumble to tune in was the voice of Terrence McKenna and many other people in the psychedelic Renaissance.
Yes, I think Darren, you mentioned them when in your presentations. You mentioned the people who started this movement. Is that correct?
Yeah, well, I didn't really. It was a bit muffled my end of question, so could you just repeat it?
You mentioned, I think Terrence McKenna was the gentleman's name. That's listening to one of the shows on KPFK who had one of the people in the vanguard of looking at mushrooms.
Sure, yeah, he was definitely one of the pioneers and, opened up these dialogues for us to have more mature conversations.
Okay, we have 1 minute left. Caller, you still on the line? Did you have a specific question?
No, I just wanted to say thanks for putting this on today, and thanks to KPFK for allowing this platform to be open to this discussion, this topic, and also just that there is just for people to understand, it's not to promote a specific organization, but there's an organization called MAPS, M-A-P-S, and they're doing their annual conference.
Gotcha.
About the 37th year right now.
Okay, Naps. Asha, we got to go. Darren, I want to leave it with you. How can people contact you? Because we have to go.
All right, yeah, man, you can hit me up my website. That's darrenlebaron.com, DarrenLebaron.com. Then you can get access to all the social media platforms, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, and stuff like that.
Man, I appreciate you.
Thanks for coming on the show.
Be a stranger, all right?
Yeah, I want a care package.
Peace, brother. Thanks.
All right, peace, man. All the best. Thanks again.